Hello, so about a year ago, actually about two now, people were asking me, hey, can you do a hand tutorial? Hey, can you tell us how you draw hands? Hey, you draw hands really good. Can you show me how? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so I scripted it all out and I got it all recorded and I never voiced it over, and now the advice is outdated. And so we're doing it again, and hopefully it'll make it through editing this time. If you are watching this, then hurrah for me, I did it. First off, with hands, is the main issue I see and the main detriment is with the palm, because you need a good palm to form the entirety of a good hand. And what I mostly see is people using boxes for their guidelines and using just solely a box for just placing the thumb here, some fingers here, and it just ends up looking very stiff. It looks very rigid. It just doesn't work so well. There are some art styles which have very blocky elements to them and very blocky styles and shape language, and I will get back to later why some of those work and why they still don't entirely rely on just boxes. So if we're looking at our handy dandy super high quality hand here, you can see that the palm isn't a block shape. This isn't just a box. You can't really capture its likeness with just a box. What I personally like to do, there are many different shapes of work. Some people use hexagons, some people use circles, some people use ovals. I personally find that those don't work as well for me with guidelines, but I have seen fantastic artists who use those as their starts. I personally use somewhat of a box, but I add a taper towards the wrist and towards the base of the fingers, and then a curve over where the fingers are connected to the palm. Because as you can see, this group of fingers is a bit higher up on the palm than the outer two, and so you just want to account for that with your style, even with stylization, and you just want to make sure that they are on different levels of the palm. And then for this little thumb fleshy bit, it's really easy to just do. It's just a little trapezoid and just keeping that shape there on the side, because it does kind of jut out a bit, and it's important to note that jutting out a bit so the thumb doesn't seem like sunken in to the palm. And then once you have this basic shape, you can focus on the more intricate details of the palm, like this little thumb fleshy bit, which can be drawn with a curved triangle. We have the little finger fleshy bit, which can just be drawn to the curve within the tapered box, and then another fleshy bit, which can again be drawn with a funky triangle. And I'm so good at naming. I know there's probably not names for these. I will put them on screen if I find them, and if I remember. But there's just, you need to keep count for those bits, because whenever the hand moves, it wrinkles, and those bits are where the muscle moves. I'm assuming it's muscle. I didn't pay attention to biology, but they stand out as prominent shapes in different poses, as you can see with like this guy, which again is so high quality. I'm so sorry I can't find good image qualities, but as you can see, that the thumb stands out a lot, and has this like little tapered trapezoid, but this time is curved to account for the change in plane, and the top fleshy bit scrunches down, which still can be represented by a rectangle, and the side fleshy bit is also again very prominent as the hand scrunches inwards. And so it's very important to account for these smaller shapes when drawing more complex motions with the hand, because they will react very differently than the center of the palm. Or even if you have like the other side of the hand, they're obviously not going to be there, but these curvatures are very important to take into account for, even if you're stylizing where they aren't super prominent. It's important just to understand what's going on beneath the skin. And back to my point with the more blocky art styles, even if you have a very blocky style of the hands, I'll like do a quick, very messy example on screen. It's still useful to take into account the non-box qualities of the hand. So like in this case, everything is just kind of very rigid. It doesn't really look that great. the stylization is just, it is boxy. It is just kind of boxy to a fault. But if we were to do a very similar pose, but taking into the taper and having the trapezoid for the thumb and keeping this curve there, we can have, again, very boxy fingers and a very overall boxy look. But it has more visual interest than if we were to just have it be a box. Okay, now that we have the base covered, let's discuss fingers. So the main thing to keep in mind when drawing fingers is their groups. As you can see here, there's a group for the middle two and individual groups for the outer two. This is just a general natural positioning element of fingers. If you can look at your own hand, if you just have it at rest, the distance between the ring finger and the pinky finger and the middle finger and the pointer finger is much larger than that of the ring finger and middle finger. And you can see this also in these poses where it's more spread out. You can see that the distance here is much less than the distance here and here. And then here you can see again these fingers are grouped, and then these two are out on their own. This can be put in more extreme terms where you can have just one chunk of finger and then one finger out to show definition, similarly to how when we draw hair with just a massive block and then add definition and kind of the implication of detail. But it's just a very useful, just draw hands fast, you can just group these fingers. And even whenever you are defining every single finger, it's important to know that these joints will be closer, and then these joints will have a bit of space between them. And you can really stretch this. You can have like, super messy palm. You can have like a very noticeable gap between your fingers, and it will look very interesting because they have that basic distance. And you can make very cool shape language and very cool stylization choices with that spacing of fingers. And of course, the hands are a very mobile thing. You can obviously stretch the middle finger and ring finger out to the point where that group no longer really applies, but this applies to like natural resting poses and just not super like strenuous poses, where these groups will be prominent. Another thing to note is the knuckles. Hands naturally have 3 knuckles, as you can see here, here, and here. But many art styles, including my own, will simplify it down to 2. Just personally, it's easier to keep track of and easier to make look fluid. But the important thing about knuckles is they kind of bend like a chain reaction. Like you can't really bend just the top. That kind of looks like a little dinosaur. You can't really bend just the top knuckle. If you are to slightly bend your finger, chances are it will be the top like this, and it'll kind of have that slight curvature. And then if you're to fully bend your finger, then the 3 knuckles will become more prominent and you'll get a little hook shape. But you just have to keep in mind the relationship between the flexibility of the knuckles. That's very important if you choose to draw hands with 3 knuckles. Personally, that's far too complicated. I'm simplifying it to 2 and calling it a day. But to each their own. It's whatever suits your fancy. And another very obvious thing with fingers is, again, the length. As you can see, I'm gonna erase these guidelines. As you can see, we can follow the look of the palm, the upper curve of the palm, and we can kind of just do that again at the top of the fingers. You can kind of follow that exact shape of a curve and touch all the fingertips and get all those proportions with the fingers. And it can be emphasized more, like you can have like a palm like that, and you can have like little like that, but the uppermost point of the palm, which will be the middle finger, will also be the uppermost point of the finger, which again will be the middle finger. And it's just another point to think about when shaping, is just that little ensure everything is a-okay and looking good, and make sure they have that same curvature. Now that we have the basic line art and the structure of a hand covered, it's time for my personal favorite part, coloring. There are several crucial elements to the coloration of a hand, and a lot of it is very dependent on skin tone, on profession, on all these different factors. And it's really cool to do storytelling via the hand. For example, if you're making a character who's a farmer, their hands would be very tanned, very dark, they'd be very calloused, very rough, very scratchy. But if you were to do like a model, then likelihood is their hands would be very soft, very light, very just unscathed. They'd have very soft, delicate hands. And it's very cool to do additional storytelling through that element with like which beyond the character's clothing and then beyond their costuming, you can do a lot of very cool additions to their character with the physical structure, such as hands or just skin in general. Skin is a very good tell for the environment of a character. So we're just gonna draw a hand real quick using all the techniques we've learned so far. I'm going to do a front view and a back view to focus on the coloration of both. Okay, there we go. We're gonna make 2 copies of this, one with a very light skin tone and one with a very dark skin tone. For the lights, we're gonna start with the light skin tone. Light skin in general will show redness a lot more than dark skin tones will, and so this is important to account for when drawing hands and any part of the light skin tone person's body, and just keeping account for this emphasis in the redness. So as you can see here, there's in the bottom reference image, you can see there's a lot of reds in like the pads of the fingers. They're very red. They're exposed to the most wear and tear, and so if, again, as back to my comment of worker characters, they can experience like irritation, as seems to be the case in this photo, or they will just be darker because of the calluses, or they would have a rougher texture, again because of the callousing. And it's just very important to account for all these elements when designing a character and their physical elements. So as you can see, it's also like somewhat on all these parts, and it's just very prominent. And the similar areas are shaded on the back of a hand as more blood rushes towards the tips of the fingers, and so there's kind of this fade. There's kind of this fade from the base peach of the hand and the redder elements further on. But it is not as complicated as the palm. Okay, another element to keep in mind is around the knuckles, the skin will be stretched a bit tighter, and so if you wish to detail that, you can do so by taking your base color and just kind of going around the tip of the knuckles and just kind of like going down by the tendons and just defining those shapes to really emphasize the changes in the bone structure beneath the form. And it is more prominent in more stressed gestures such as a fist, but it is important to note that it is an element which can be seen in just resting neutral positions. That's important to keep note of. This bit, I think I went a bit harsh on the red, so we're gonna lighten that up a bit. Make sure it doesn't look don't have some sunburned palms. It's very uncomfortable for our bodiless character. And as for fingernails, the coloration of fingernails varies wildly, especially if they're painted. But generally, they will be kind of cut off oval shapes at near the end of the hand. Personally, I like to take the base color I did before any rendering, and I like to draw little circles by the ends. And then I will take a darker color around that point, and I will cut off the ovals and make room around for the fingertip around when there isn't going to be any nail. And if you look at the fingernails, if the character hasn't grown out enough, you will see a bit of white bit, and so we can easily add that by just getting a bit of get the same tone, but make it a bit more desaturated, and just going around and filling those in and adding some sharp lines since this is looking pretty muddy rendering wise. And there you have it, a light-skinned hand. As for dark skin, big tip with dark skin in general is you don't want to go orange. Or you don't want to go gray, don't want to go orange, don't want to go to bright red. You want a nice neutral color. I mean, of course, it depends on the environment, but in general, in neutral lighting, you want to just have a natural skin tone. Black people aren't gray. They're not red either. Like, it's just important to keep in mind, you know. It's just kind of a natural brown. A big thing with hands of black people, it is present some in hands of lighter skin tones, but as you can see here, there's a very large tonal difference between the palm and the rest of the skin. And so to accomplish that, we can just go up a little bit and nudge this a bit towards the orange, and let's see how that looks. That looks a bit dark still, and so that looks good. And so then we can just get a brush a bit smaller and go around the palm and make sure that all the front plane of the inner palm is all colored with that lighter color rather than the dark color of the rest of the skin, just due to the difference to the exposure of sunlight and such. And then once you're done with that, it has some of the similar elements as the lighter colored hand, and so we'll take a nicer red. You can go into pink some with darker skin tones, I've found, but I am not black, and so if you would like a more in-depth tutorial on darker skin tone drawing, I would suggest one by the many black artists on the internet. If I remember, I will try to put one in the upper corner right there, and just some good one you can check out. And you're gonna again want to, oh, that is not the right brush. You're just gonna want to kind of go down from the fingers. That's too small. Go down from the fingers and just kind of like add that coloration of like from the blood and such, and just add that differentiation in these elements. And as you can see, they also have much more prominent crease lines, which my style personally doesn't really cover, but that is just another thing to note if you are gonna go into that level of detail. And again, we can take this nice lighter color and we can scrape away at the knuckles and make them look all good and worn, and then go back and take away from those shapes and just further define the knuckles, and then go back. This is a sneak peek in my entire rendering process. It's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until eventually there's a nice color variation. And then we're gonna get that reddish tone from before, and gonna do the exact same thing as the other hand, and we're gonna go in and darken these fingers up. Now for black skin tones, I find in my studies frequently the fingernails will be a bit lighter than the base of the skin, and so for that I like to take the skin tone from over here, the palm skin tone, and use that to outline the fingernails, and use that as like a base color for them. And then we can get our little marks in here, and then cut off the ovals. There you go. And that is how to color your hands. And now that you have all those basics mastered, all you can do now is practice and apply these basic elements into more dynamic and varied poses. I have 9 references over here on my screen, and I'm just going to go through and follow all the steps I have detailed to you all and just draw some hands. And there you have it, 4 hands, very messy, poorly drawn, but hands nonetheless. I just like to say thank you so much for watching. I am obviously still learning. I've not had much experience art. I've been drawing for 7 years now, but I am only 15, so there's 7 more to go. If I ever learn some more groundbreaking secrets to hands and their wonders, I will be sure to make another tutorial, if I remember, where I go over that. But for now, that is all my tips and tricks. You can go and draw hands as good as me now. And I hope you enjoyed. If you would like to see a tutorial of another element of my art, feel free to comment that, or tag me on Twitter, or ask me on Tumblr. I am on every social media. I'll put them up on the screen. Okay, thank you again for watching, and farewell. Subscribe, like, and comment. Feed my family. Goodbye.